Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sarah Eldori. I'm the Marketing Director of ReachWork. We're a portfolio of specialist job sites, gap web, accountancy and finance, totally legal jobs, and Sex in the City for PA and EA roles. We're very aware that disabled candidates face additional barriers when looking for work, so we've partnered with Evenbreak to run today's webinar. Evenbreak provide free, accessible careers and employment support for disabled candidates, all designed and delivered by people with lived experience of disability. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them using the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Jane Hatton, Director of Evenbreak, who will be talking to us today about how to feel confident in your job search as a disabled candidate. Thanks, Jane, and over to you.
Oh, thanks very much, and welcome everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and hope that we can help you with your job search. We know that disabled candidates face barriers that other candidates don't, and clearly what we want to do is help you to navigate around those barriers and find some ways of really presenting yourself as a premium candidate. And we strongly believe at Evenbreak that disabled candidates are premium candidates, not pity hires like some employers might like to think. So I wanted to start by looking at the social model of disability. So next slide, please. And this is something that we really feel strongly about at Evenbreak. If you could just do a couple of clicks to get the, that's it, lovely, thank you. So traditionally, as many of you will know, when we look at disability, we tend to look at it very much through a medical lens. So we would look at this scenario. So the image we have in front of us is of a man at the bottom of a flight of stairs, and he's in a wheelchair. The medical model would look at this situation and say, okay, he is the problem. Because he can't walk up those stairs like most people, he's the problem, and therefore he needs to be fixed. And the medical model kind of looks at disabled people from a deficit perspective, that somehow we're not as good as other people because we're not the same as other people. And the solution to that problem is to fix us. Well, there's a couple of problems with that way of looking at disability. The first one is that many of us can't or shouldn't be fixed. I'm disabled. Everybody who works at Evenbreak is disabled. And most of us can't be, in inverted commas, cured, even if we wanted to be. So actually the medical model doesn't really offer us much at all. But also the medical model really is predicated on an assumption that everybody should be the same. We should all have the same level of abilities. And there's a kind of arbitrary idea of normal that everybody should conform to. And we know that that's not how the world works. The world thrives on diversity and, biodiversity, people being different perspectives. And so the medical model has a role to play, because I think we all want our symptoms to be eased. In my case, I have a spinal condition and have significant pain. And I would love for the medical people to, invent some kind of pain relief that doesn't have horrific side effects. But actually, in the world of work and employment, employers, recruiters can't and shouldn't try and change us as disabled people. So in the 70s and 80s, disability activists said, actually, there's a different way of looking at disability. And they would look at this very same scenario, a man in a wheelchair at the bottom of a flight of stairs, and say, he's not the problem. The stairs are the problem. If those stairs weren't there, if this building had lifts or ramps, or we could bring down to this man, whatever it was he was trying to access at the top of the stairs, he wouldn't be disabled. He's not disabled by needing a wheelchair. He's disabled by an inaccessible building. And actually, although that's a very obvious example, it's the same for all of us. In terms of the social model, we are all disabled by the environment that we live in, not just by our condition. And if we can remove those barriers, then we become less disabled and more able to participate. And so when we talk to employers about employing disabled people, we talk about, A, the fact that disabled candidates are premium candidates, which I'll come on to in a little bit, but also that actually the employers responsibility is to remove the barriers that might exist in the recruitment process or in the workplace. That could be inaccessible transport, inaccessible websites, inaccessible technology, inaccessible processes and policies, for example. And so the social model actually says there's nothing wrong with disabled people. What is wrong is that we live in a world that's been designed by non-disabled people who haven't taken into consideration our access needs. And that's not because people are nasty and horrible. It's because, generally speaking, what people do is they assess things by, would this work for me? Yes, it would work for me, therefore it's okay. Whereas actually something that might work for me might not work for you, and vice versa. And so the reality of that is that disabled people are so individual and unique and have almost nothing in common with each other. We're such a diverse group of people. But the one thing we do have in common is that we face barriers on a daily basis that other people don't. They might be different barriers. They might be barriers around transport, housing, healthcare, access to information, communication, the media, whatever it is. But we all face barriers that other people don't. And what that means is that we develop skills to navigate around those barriers. So we can't always do things in the same way that other people do. So we have to develop creative thinking to find out other ways of doing things. In my case, I find it difficult to sit. And so I had to find a way of lying down and working with a laptop suspended above me. And 12 years ago, when that happened, that was not a normal thing to do. And so it's quite difficult. I had to be quite creative in how am I going to do this? And it's the same for everyone who is disabled by these barriers, that we have to find alternative ways of doing things. So we develop that creative thinking, that innovation, that problem solving, the resilience, the determination. And actually, we don't leave those skills at the door when we go into a workplace. We bring them with us. So somebody who might be a wheelchair user is almost essentially a good project manager, because it means that if you're planning a trip into town, you can't just pop in the car and go, or pop on the bus and go, like most people. You have to think about what happens if all the accessible parking spaces are full. Where am I going to park then? And is the building I'm trying to get to accessible? And if I'm using public transport, what happens if the lift isn't working at the station? I'm going to have to go to a different station. So there's always a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. And that's project management. That's really good project management skills. And again, we don't leave those at the door when we go to work. We bring those with us. And employers are looking for people who don't run away at the first sign of a problem, who have creative thinking, who can be innovative, who can project manage, all of those things. And by design, almost, we bring those things with us because we are faced by barriers just to get through every day. And so that's one of the reasons why we think that we know that disabled candidates are premium candidates, because we have the same diversity of skills and qualities and strengths as the rest of the population, but we also have these additional skills that we've developed through having to somehow navigate around a world that's not designed for us. So next slide, please. When we talk to employers about employing disabled people, sometimes the first reaction is, oh, poor things, what a shame. We really ought to give them a chance. And then we interrupt and say, actually, this isn't about charity. This isn't about pity. This is about talent. And then the response comes back and says, oh, well, yes, of course it is. But, disabled people will be off sick all the time and they won't be very productive and they'll need very expensive adaptations and they won't be skilled and they won't have qualifications and they won't really be as good as non-disabled people. So we can't really employ them. And if all of those myths were true, then that would be valid. I don't want to employ people who aren't productive, who aren't motivated, who aren't able to work in great ways. And yet I only employ disabled people at Evenbreak. And so when we talk to employers, we talk very much about the benefits to them of employing disabled people. They're not doing us a favor by taking pity on us and offering us a job. Actually, disabled people have an awful lot to offer employers. So I'll talk about these with the next two slides. So the next slide first, please. And as I'm talking, have a think about which of these benefits that I'm talking about applies to you, so that when you go to an employer, you can say, actually, I bring all of these skills and experience and strengths and qualities, and also these other things. So we'll go click by click. So the first one is a wider pool of talent. 20% of us in the UK, across the world, either have a disability or a long-term health condition. And if employers are going to exclude that pool of talent, that's 20% of the talent out there that they're missing out on. So all of us can offer that benefit. We're offering them talent that they might not have otherwise looked at. And then the next one is about productivity. And there is a concern with many of the employers that we talk to that disabled people won't be as productive as non-disabled people. But actually, there have been many studies, lots of research done on this very subject at different times, independently of each other, different countries, and they pretty much all come up with the same conclusion, which is that on average, disabled people are every bit as productive as non-disabled people. So if that's the average, some of us will be more productive than non-disabled people. And if you think, for example, of someone who might use speech-to-text dictation software, they are likely to be much quicker and more accurate than people who just type normally, because the software doesn't make spelling mistakes, it doesn't make grammatical errors, and it works at the speed of someone's voice. So they may end up being not only quicker, but more accurate than other people around them. If we have someone who is deaf or autistic, prefers to work on their own, they may very well not be distracted by what's going on around them, but very much get in the zone and work solidly. One of the biggest problems I have at Evenbreak is stopping people working and actually saying, why are you still online at 7? You know, you should have turned your computer off and be watching some trashy television or whatever it is that people want to do. And people sometimes just get in the zone and they're very, very productive. So if that's you, if you feel that your condition means that you are, for whatever reason, more productive than average because of assistive technology that you use, or because you can be more focused, more hyper-focused, then make sure that you're aware of that and make sure that employers are aware of that too. And then the next one is reduced sickness absence. And lots of employers are surprised by this. But on average, disabled people have up to 30% less time off sick than non-disabled people. And that's because of the social model. We're all used to working under difficult conditions. We might be using technology that doesn't really work for us. We might be working while we're in pain. We might be struggling with a bit of communication or whatever it is. And so if we then have a sniffle, we're not going to phone in sick because we know what it's like to work under difficult circumstances. It doesn't mean that there aren't disabled people who will need time off sick, people who have fluctuating conditions or have appointments, medical appointments or whatever. But actually, on average, we tend to have less time off sick. And again, at Evenbreak, my problem, we all work from home remotely. And so I suppose it's easier to carry on working when you're not very well. But, I've had to say to people, for goodness sake, go to bed, you're ill, stop working, because they will just plow on, plow through. Because that's what we're used to doing. That makes us more reliable employees. And then the next one is about workplace accidents. And a lot of employers are worried about health and safety, and are we going to be tripping up over things or bumping into things or a hazard for other people? But again, all of the research, all of the studies show that on average, disabled people have far fewer workplace accidents. And that's because those of us who know that we are vulnerable to having accidents will put things into place to stop it happening. So we might have a guide dog or a white cane, or we might have, for example, I have a spinal condition, and if I fall, I could damage my neck even further and lose the use of my hands and arms. I'm going to make absolutely certain I don't do that. It's not something I particularly want to do. And so I'm going to put things into place to make sure I don't fall over. And so again, if your condition means that you are likely to be more safe because you will put things in place to make sure that you are, then that's an advantage that you bring with you. The next one is on retention. And we know that for disabled people who work in a place where they feel valued and supported, are unlikely to move around very much because, to other employers, because we don't know that we're going to get that same level of support and value in the next employer. So if we are employed by an organization that looks after us, we're going to be very loyal. We're going to stay there. And, we're going to make sure that we don't keep leaving. And that's got to be a benefit. So if we have a good track record of staying in work for a long time, then that's, again, something else that we can tell employers that makes us stand out above others. This next one is incredibly important for every single organization. So 20% of the population are disabled or have a long-term health condition. And every organization will be interacting with that customer base. Now, it might be, even if they're a business-to-business organization, they're going to be working with people within other businesses, 20% of who are likely to be disabled. So if the organization reflects the customers, so 20% of the organization's workforce are people who have disabilities or long-term health conditions, then that means that the organization has internal intelligence on everything to do with accessibility and inclusion. So if they're designing products or services, they're thinking about marketing, they're looking at how they interact with customers or partners or suppliers. If they have that internal knowledge of that lived experience, then they're going to be much, much better at making sure that their products, their services, their marketing actually includes everybody that's out there. So they'll have a bigger market base. They'll have a better reputation. One of the many reasons that we only employ disabled people at Evenbreak is because all of our candidates are disabled and we need to know what barriers they're facing. And I only know anything about, my disability, but there are lots of other disabilities, conditions that I don't have. And so between us, we really do have that lived experience. And that's not just important for Evenbreak, that's important for everybody, whether you're a bank or a retail organization or a hospital or a public service, whatever it is, that organization needs to reflect to their customers. So one of the things that you can say to a prospective employer is, look, I have insight, lived experience in how people like me access your product or services, and I can help you with that. And that's gold dust. You can't even put a price on that in terms of organizations' profitability. And then on the next slide, organizations benefit from having people with a wider pool of talent. So one click more, please. And so I'm thinking here particularly of people who may have neurodivergent conditions. So you may be autistic or dyslexic or dyspraxic or have Tourette's or ADHD or any of those neurodivergent conditions, or you may have a mental health condition like bipolar or schizophrenia. And what that means is that you think differently to the rest of us. I don't have any of those conditions, so I'm very boring and I will think in a very typical, predictable way. But one of the many things I love about our team is that we all think differently. So we might be talking about designing a new service or solving a problem or whatever it might be. And somebody in the team will say, I've got an idea. And then you think, great, because I know this idea will be something I would never have thought of in a million lifetimes, and it will be brilliant. And that's the real benefit. And again, you can't put a price on that, about having people who challenge the status quo, who say, why are we doing it this way? Why can't we do it that way? And who just think differently. So come up with new ideas, new solutions. It's amazing if that organization wants to stay innovative and ahead of the game, it really needs to employ people who think differently. So that might be people with a neurodivergent condition or with a mental health condition. We used to say that, employing neurodiverse people was a luxury, but actually it isn't a luxury. It's a business imperative in these days of competition. And actually with the next one, we all bring those additional skills with us that we talked about when I mentioned the social model. So we have all, whatever our condition, developed skills to navigate around this world that isn't built for us. And sometimes we take those for granted, but actually we need to be explicit about those when we're applying for a job, because we bring those with us. Other people may not. Then the next one is about morale within an organization. lots of studies that suggest organisations who employ disabled people and support them, actually the morale is improved across the whole of the organisation, not just for disabled employees, because disability can happen to anyone at any time. And if people can see, well, actually, my employer really values its people and looks after them, I really love working here, I feel safe, then that's got to be good for the organisation. They're going to attract the very, very best staff. So just by being there, you will be improving the morale of an organisation. And the reputation of an organisation is really important. So if an organisation has a reputation of being inclusive, of being open, of valuing staff, of supporting staff, it will attract the very best candidates. And so just by employing someone who is maybe different from your typical candidate means that they are working towards that reputation, that people can see this organisation is great because it recognises talent and it values talent and it rewards talent and it doesn't discriminate against people just because they're different. So that's another benefit that you bring. And then finally, since the pandemic, the world of work has changed in ways that we could never have imagined and changed quickly. And Evenbreak were kind of a bit of ahead of the curve on this one. So we've been working remotely since we started in 2011, so long before COVID was ever heard of. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we were a bit smug because people were coming to us, organizations were coming to us and saying, everybody's working at home now. So how do we do collaborative work? How do we communicate with people? How do we make them feel part of the team? And because this is something we've been doing forever, we were able to lead them on that. And actually, for every disabled person, we're able to give people confidence that there are different ways of working that work just as well, whether that's hybrid working or remote working or using different technology, just working in different ways. We've always had to do that. So we can actually be leaders in an organization in helping and supporting people to embrace this new way of working and make it work for all of us. And so those were, I don't know how many, a dozen or so benefits of employing disabled people, which has nothing to do with CSR and nothing to do with charity and nothing to do with pity, but everything to do with why this is good for an organization. And we shouldn't have to create a business case for employing disabled people. But the reality is that doing so is good for business. We're incredibly successful as an organization. And I put that entirely down to having a team that has lived experience, that is innovative, creative, all of those things I've just talked about. And I know that it's good for Evenbreak. And if it's good for Evenbreak, it will be good for every other employer. And so we need to be talking to employers in those terms. It's not, please give me a job because no one else will, or please give me a job because I'm struggling. It's, please give me this job because I have all the skills you need and a few more. Let me tell you about them. So it's going in with that mindset of not only do I have the same kinds of qualities that the other candidates have, I'm bringing a few additional ones with me too, and I need you to know about that. So that's something just maybe to think about. And yeah, the next slide, what happens when you focus on what you can do rather than what you can't do? And I think the way society talks about disability and disabled people is very negative. We focus on what people can't do. Oh, that person can't see, so they can't drive. Or, oh, that person can't do this, therefore they can't do that. And we don't do it with non-disabled people. Before I became disabled, nobody said, oh, she can't speak Russian, there's something wrong with her. But when I couldn't walk for a while, it was kind of, oh, what's wrong with her? And actually, all of the things that I could do before I could walk, when I could walk, apart from walking, I can still do. I can still do all of those things. I still have all of the experience that I brought with me. I still have all the knowledge. The only thing is changed is that I need a different way of transport. And actually, even that's changed now. But we tend to focus as a society very much around what can't disabled people do. I don't know if any of you watched there was a documentary the other night from Rose, can't remember her name, who was the deaf woman that won Strictly Come Dancing. And she was talking about sign language particularly. But documentaries like that really demonstrate the talent that disabled people have that we tend not to think about because we're so busy thinking about what we can't do. And because that's so endemic in our society, we end up doing it ourselves. And I'd been in the field of inclusion and diversity, including disability, long before I became disabled myself. So for years, I had been saying to employers, you need a diverse workforce. It's beneficial for you. Diverse people bring additional talents with them. And yet, when I became disabled, which happened quite suddenly when I was in my mid-40s, I spent a very long time focusing on what I couldn't do, even though I was the one person that should have known better. I was a single mom of teenage daughters who weren't yet old enough to drive, so I was their taxi service. Can't drive now, so I'm a lesser mum. I can't do this now, I can't go for walks, I can't, all of the things I couldn't do that I kept focusing on, comparing myself with the life I had before I was disabled and the life I have now. And thinking, I can't do this now, and I can't do that now, and I can't do something else now. Until I suddenly remembered, hang on, when you talk to employers about disabled people, you don't do this. You don't talk about what they can't do. You talk about what they can do. Why are you doing this? It's not helpful. So then I switched my thinking to, okay, so there are some things I can't do that I could do before, but what are the things I still can do? And also, what are the things I now can do that I couldn't do before? So now I can empathise with people who have chronic pain. I can empathise with people who struggle to get work in the same ways that others do. I can empathise, I can think differently. I learned to be creative because I had to find ways of doing things in ways that I couldn't do them before. And so once that switch had flicked, that meant that instead of spending all that time focusing on what I couldn't do, I started to think about what I could do. I was actually quite impressed with myself. Wow, look at all those things I can do. And it might be things that you've done in the work in the past. It might be particular strengths that you have. You might be great at detail. You might be great at interpersonal skills. You might be good at humor. You might be good at creative thinking, whatever it might be. And those things are still the case. That doesn't go away because we acquire a disability. We still have loads of things that we can do and some things that non-disabled people can't do. So as a group of people, we need to start focusing on those things that we can do, those positive things that we bring with us, rather than, I can't do this and I can't do that. And some of our candidates, when they talk to employers, will spend the first half hour telling them exactly why they shouldn't employ them. Well, I'd need this and I'd need that, and I can't do this and I can't do that. Actually, as an employer, I don't want to hear what you can't do. I want to hear what you can do. What can you bring to my business? Why would I want to employ you? And so it's really important that we focus on that, because non-disabled people do that. They don't go into a job interview thinking about the things they can't do. They're going in thinking about what they can do and why they'd be a good addition to this organization. And so my next question is really linked to that is, why is it important that you see yourself as a premium candidate and not as a pity hire? And it's important because if you don't see yourself as a premium candidate, you can bet your bottom dollar that the employer won't or the recruiter won't. And so what we need to do, because we still live in this unequal society, is first of all, actually believe that we are a premium candidate, and we absolutely are. I can tell you now, every candidate I've ever met that uses Evenbreak as a job board is remarkable in some way or another. It might be nothing to do with their disability, or it might be to do with their disability. I've never met an untalented person. And so, in some way, shape or form. But we have to see that first before we can convince it to other people. So again, go into that interview not thinking, I hope they give me a job because the last 50 interviews I went to, they didn't. It's about going into the interview thinking, they'd be really lucky to have me. And I've got so much I can tell them about why I'd be a really great addition, and focus on those things and what you bring with you, and be proud of being a disabled person, and let them know that as you're disabled, these are all the things that you bring with you that maybe some of the other candidates don't. So, it is important. And we know that we face barriers that other people don't. So actually moving on to the next slide. we looked at what barriers disabled people face when they're looking for work, and we got UCL to do some research for us. And they spoke to or interviewed or surveyed hundreds and hundreds of disabled people who were looking for work, and identified the three biggest barriers that we as disabled people face when we're looking for work. So the first one was not knowing which employers are really inclusive to disabled candidates. We know that most aren't. We know that most employers will say, we are an equal opportunities employer, or we are an inclusive employer. But we know that most aren't when it comes to disability, because that's why we're rejected so often, for no good reason other than, that we're rejected, although of course they'll never actually say that. The second biggest barrier was inaccessible recruitment and employment processes. So it might be an online recruitment form that you have to fill in that's inaccessible with a screen reader, or it might be timed and it doesn't give you enough time to fill it in. Or it might rely on a CV, and your CV might not be as impressive as it should be because you've been discriminated against in the past and haven't been given the opportunities to show your brilliance. And so that can be a huge barrier. And then the third one that disabled people said was lack of confidence in themselves due to having been rejected so often for no good reason. So eventually when you're rejected, you start to think, oh, maybe I'm not good enough for this. Maybe I don't have the skills and talents that I think I've got. Maybe I'm never going to get a job. And it can really wear you down. You don't need me to tell you that when you're really fighting to get a job, but nobody can see the brilliance. They're too fixated on whatever the disability might be. And so at Evenbreak, what we wanted to do was address all of those barriers. So the first thing we did was, on the next slide, we designed this specialist job board. So this is a job board just for disabled candidates who are looking for new or better work, and just for those employers who are enlightened enough to see us as a pool of talent, not as a source of problems. So what that means is if you go on that job board, that you will find jobs from employers who are paying to advertise their jobs on a job board that's specifically for disabled candidates. So they mean it. They're not just saying, we are an inclusive employer, it doesn't cost anything, doesn't mean anything. They're putting their money where their mouth is. They're demonstrating their commitment. We also wanted to support employers to be much better in terms of having accessible recruitment processes, flexible working, accessible and inclusive employment processes and practices. So we developed a best practice portal for employers where they can look at resources which have all been designed and delivered by disabled people. And we offer bespoke training and consultancy. So one of the things we do is help employers look at their recruitment process from vacancy arising right through to onboarding, and looking at what the potential barriers might be for disabled people at every stage of that process, and then making recommendations for improving that process so that it's much more open, flexible, and works for everybody. And the third thing we did in terms of candidates saying, I just lost my confidence, I just don't think I have any skills, is we developed and started a career hive, which is career support service for disabled people looking for new or better work, and giving that kind of career support and advice, but very much through a disability and accessible lens, because a lot of our candidates were saying that a lot of the career support that's out there is either inaccessible or it's irrelevant because it doesn't take into account those additional barriers that we face, or it's not delivered by people with lived experience of disability, or you have to meet certain eligibility criteria to access it. You have to be on a certain benefit, or you have to live in a certain postcode or whatever. And so the Career Hive offers all sorts of different things, which I'll talk about later, again, all delivered and designed by disabled people. So if we go on to the next slide, just to talk in a little bit more detail, obviously, there are lots of job boards that Reach Work use, and I'm not suggesting that you should only use Evenbreak at all, but it's certainly a good additional job board to use, because you know that the employers who are advertising on Evenbreak are they're paying to specifically target disabled candidates because they know that they need that talent. And so you can feel safe when you apply that you might not get the job, who knows, but you won't be discriminated against because of your disability. You'll have a fair crack at the recruitment process. And we work globally. We work with lots of different organizations, pan sector. So it could be broadcasting, could be finance, could be engineering, whatever. And so it's worth adding that to your armory of job boards that you look at when you're searching for a job. The Career Hive on the next slide is, as I say, it's free career support for disabled people. It's accessible. It's designed and delivered by disabled people. And on the next slide are just a few more details about what we offer. So you can search for support organizations in your area. You can search by postcode. You can search by kind of support that you're looking for. So we're not saying Evenbreak is the only organization out there. There are lots of others. And it may be that a more local one or one that's specific to your condition might be more helpful than we are. So it's really good that we can signpost you, if you like, to other organizations which might be helpful, but you're always welcome to use Evenbreak as well. We have lots of online resources to help with employment and employability, and again, looking at it through very much a disability lens. So it might be, how do you ask for adjustments? How do you speak about disability in a very positive way? Those kinds of things. There's the job board, of course, itself. And we put on events, so it might be a workshop on how to talk about disability in a positive way, or it might be a meet the employer, where you meet a particular employer online and you can ask questions and they tell you about the different kinds of jobs they have on offer, how to ask for adjustments, how to shine in their process. And then we have a team of career professionals who offer one-to-one career coaching. And they are people with lived experience of disability also. And so we can put you in touch with them, and then you can have one-to-one career support. So that's all offered free of charge and available to anybody who's disabled and looking for work. So help is out there should you need it. But I just wanted to go through some of the things today that might be useful. So on the next slide, what I really wanted to talk about was how you can shine in the recruitment process, because I know it's daunting sometimes when you think, oh, I'm competing against people who may have had more opportunities than I've had in the past, or people who don't face the challenges that I do, and I might be discriminated against because of the view of the hiring manager or whatever it might be. But there are things that we can do that can be really helpful and really help us shine in that process. And one of the biggest questions we get asked most frequently is, at what point, if ever, do I tell the recruiter that I'm disabled? And that's got to be your choice. It's got to be an individual thing. It may be that you don't want to mention it until you get the job offer, because you don't need any adaptations or adjustments in the recruitment process. It may be that you are visibly disabled, so it's going to be obvious from the interview, but you might not want to tell them until then. So the choice is absolutely yours. As a disabled person, I prefer to be absolutely upfront because it's a way of me filtering out the employers I don't want to work for. Because don't forget, this is a two-way process. It's not just about employers deciding whether they want you to work for them. It's also about you deciding whether you want to work for them. And so I think it's useful to see what their approach is to disability right from the start, because if it's poor, you needn't waste your time on anything else in that recruitment process. So if you need support, if you need a BSL interpreter, if you need a support worker, if you need the questions before the interview, if you need assistive technology, if you need a video interview rather than in-person interview, ask for it, tell them what you need, and then you'll be able to gauge from their response whether this is an organisation that actually is genuine about wanting your talent, or whether it's always going to be hard work to ask for what you need in that organisation, in which case, do you really want to work there? So I think it's important to ask for what you need, but you can do it in a really positive way. It's not about saying, oh, I'm really sorry, but I might need the questions in advance because I'm, let's say, autistic, and it takes me a little bit longer to process questions, and I'd really feel it'd be good to have the questions in advance. Makes it sound like you're asking for a kind of favour and that there's something wrong with you. I think if we talk about disability at all, it must be in a positive way. So instead of saying, oh, I'm really sorry, it's kind of, oh, well, actually, I'm autistic, which of course means I bring all sorts of additional skills with me. It does mean I'm going to need the questions before the interview so that I can process them in my own time. But be very positive about what you're asking for. Don't be apologetic, and be open about what your condition is and why that makes you a premium candidate right at the front. And then you'll see what their response is. This is advice I'd give to any candidate, disabled or otherwise, but the more prepared you are if you're applying for a job, the better your chances. So look at the organisation, look at reviews about that organisation, look at what projects they might be working on at the moment. See how you can add value to that organisation. So it might be that you see they're doing some work with a local school for disabled children, and you might say, oh, I've noticed from your annual report that you have this relationship with this school, and that's something I'd be very keen to get involved with because I've lived experience, whatever it might be. So find out about the organisation so that when you're talking to them, either in a application form or CV or interview, you can really hone what you're talking about to make it relatable to what they're doing. So do as much research as you can about the organisation that you're applying for. And as I mentioned, really, if you're speaking about disability, do it in a very positive way. So it might be, I don't know, it will be different for every individual and we can't stereotype, but it might be, I'm deaf, which makes it really easy for me to see people's nonverbal communication. And I kind of am a bit more sensitive to that than other people. So I might notice if somebody's perhaps not being as truthful as they should, or if they're feeling nervous, or if they're feeling they're not being included. And I observe that body language because that's how I communicate. Or it might be, and again, this won't apply to every autistic person, it's just an example. Oh, well, I'm autistic, so actually this kind of repetitive work suits me really well. And I know that not everybody likes it, and they probably leave, and you probably have, quite high staff turnover in that role. But actually, in my case, it's something I thrive at doing and, would really love to do. Whatever it is, so whatever the disability is, talk about it in a very positive way. Even if it doesn't give you a specific skill, it can be that whole thing about, I'm disabled, which means on a daily basis, I have to navigate around a world that's not built for me. And so it means I've become more resilient. It means I've become a really good problem solver. It means I don't run away at the first sign of a problem because I'd never get out of bed. And actually speak about being disabled in a really positive way so that you're not saying, I'm really sorry, I'm disabled, please give me a chance, which makes it sound like you're not a good candidate. Speak about disability in a way that makes them see, wow, this candidate is amazing. They've not only managed to get this far despite all the barriers they faced, they actually have this very positive, outgoing attitude that's going to be really useful in the organisation. And it might be that you tell them things they won't have thought about in terms of the positives of disabled employees. And we know that the recruiter is likely to be a bit nervous around disability. Most are frightened of saying the wrong word. Most don't know how to support properly. They're frightened of putting their foot in it. They may be worried that you're going to be expensive. Maybe you need assistive technology or a sign language interpreter in the workplace. So it shouldn't be, but it is up to you to reassure the recruiter. So you could say, for example, actually, I use JAWS software to do my job, but that's fine because it's already loaded on my laptop and I can bring it with me. Or it might be, I need JAWS software, but it's okay because Access to Work will pay for that. So you don't need to pay for it. So it's about reassuring the recruiter and actually talking about, it may look like I need a lot of adjustments, but actually I just need flexible working, which you might offer anyway. And I just need a bowl of water for my guide dog or whatever it might be. Reassure the recruiter that you aren't going to be a problem employee and that actually the adaptations that they might need to put into place for you is actually going to make the workplace a better place anyway for everybody. So try and reassure the recruiter. It shouldn't be your job to do so, but we're in the world where unfortunately it is. And it's very much about what I said before, focusing on the positives that you bring with you, not the negatives. So don't, oh, well, I'm not very good at this, or I really struggle with that. Don't talk about those things. Talk about the things that you excel at, that you do really well. and what you bring to the organization, and focus on the skills that are going to be specifically relevant to the job that you're applying for. So sometimes, recruiters might ask for, oh, great interpersonal skills, great team working, when actually you're doing coding in a cubicle somewhere. So it's actually about saying, I'm very focused. I'm not always great with interpersonal skills, but actually for this role, I'm, a data analysis or whatever it might be, I'm brilliant at what you need. And so it's very much about focusing on the positives that you bring with you and making sure that you leave the recruiter, the employer, in absolutely no doubt that you would be an amazing candidate, an amazing employee for this position. So it's that very positive approach, not the kind of, please give me a job, I need one, more of a, you'd be really lucky to have me. You wouldn't say it in those words, obviously, but if you go in feeling, I know I can bring a lot to this role, you're going to be much in a better position to convince the recruiter of that. So that's all I've got, which is 50 minutes worth. And we've got 10 minutes, I think, for questions. So if you have any questions at all, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Thanks, Jane. That was both for sharing your personal experience, but also for offering a really thought-provoking and motivational talk. That's fantastic. We've had a couple of questions. The first one is, how much information about my disability do I need to disclose at interview?
Yeah, really good question. You don't need to disclose any. There is no legal requirement for you to tell any employer about any disability, any conditions you might have. You might choose to. And what I would say is, if you choose to, don't go into things like the medical diagnosis. I've got ankylosing spondylitis or whatever, because the recruiter won't have heard of it. Talk about it in terms of the barriers you face and the access you need. So you might say, oh, I can't use a computer like other people do, so I have this screen reading software which works for me, or I use this dictation software, or whatever it might be. So if you talk about your disability, it's not talking about it from a medical perspective, it's talking about how you're going to be able to do this job really well. And I think it's worth mentioning, because often the recruiter will be making assumptions. If they know you're disabled, they might make assumptions about what you can't do. One of our employees was asked once, he has 2 degrees, and the recruiter said to him, oh, you see, we need someone who can read emails. And he said, how do you think I got through 2 degrees? And that they can make an assumption. And if they don't ask the question, how would you do this part of the role? They're going to be left assuming you can't. So for me, if you're going to talk about it, it's about, actually, I do this task that you need me to do in this role, but I do it in this way. I use this assistive technology, or I do it this way, or I use whatever. And then that reassures the recruiter that, oh, actually, yeah, they can do this job. I had assumed that maybe they couldn't. So it's entirely up to you. You have no legal obligation whatsoever. But if you do talk about it, I would say make sure it's in that positive way, talking about what you bring with you, maybe what you might need, but so they don't worry about what you might need, because you can talk about access to work and say it will be paid for, or you already have it, you'll bring it with you, or, whatever it is that you might need. So long as you're positive about it and look at it from a social model perspective rather than a medical model, I think you're fine.
Okay, brilliant. That's really helpful. Quite a few questions coming in now. One of them is, you referenced access to work. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, they call it the government's best kept secret. It's because they don't publicize it very much. It's where the government will pay for things that you need in order to do your work. So it might be taxis to and from work if you can't access transport, or for traveling around within work if you can't access public transport or don't drive. It might be a British Sign Language interpreter. It might be assistive technology. It might be coaching. It might be an ergonomic chair. It might be a bigger monitor. It could be whatever it is that you need in order to do your job, so that you're not disadvantaged because of your disability. And the government will pay all or most of those costs. Sorry, was someone yeah, no. So yeah, the government will pay all or most of those costs, and you have to apply for that as the candidate. But we can help you do that. It may be that your agency can help you do that. But yeah, it's great. And most employers don't know about it either. So now you do know about it, you'll be able to say, actually, I will need X, Y, or Z, but there's this scheme called Access to Work. So if you Google Access to Work, it's on the gov.uk site, find out all about it. And then when you go and talk to an employer or a recruiter, you can say, you don't need to worry because this will be paid for by Access to Work. So it's really, the more you know about it, the better.
That's brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you. Someone else has asked, on application forms, they ask about disability. If I answer yes, how will this affect me?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's one of those things that you just don't know. It depends on the employer. This is where you're doing your homework comes in. For me, if it's an organisation that you've found on Evenbreak, or if you look at the website of that employer and it's a disability confident employer, or there's something on that website that tells you this organisation is open to disabled candidates, my instinct will be to say yes. If you're not sure, you can say no, or not answer the question. And then it might be that you don't mention it until later on. They're not allowed to ask you if you are disabled in law. They can ask you if you need adjustments, they can ask you for monitoring purposes. But in terms of the actual application itself, that's not something they can ask. If they're asking because they're monitoring, that's probably a good sign, because they need to know, how well they're doing on employing disabled people. But it is absolutely your choice. You have no obligation to declare that you're disabled. And for some organisations, we know it's the case that it may well put hiring managers off because they are ignorant and don't recognise that we're premium candidates. So if you can see an organisation is disability friendly, I would say yes, but it's entirely your choice.
Okay, thank you. And finally, I can only work part-time. Most jobs are inevitably full-time. Is there a way I can turn this into a positive?
Absolutely. And I think since the pandemic, a lot more jobs are open to being part-time or job share or flexible hours, but it doesn't always say so in the job advert. So what we say to our candidates is, if you see a job that you know is just right for you, but it's being advertised as full-time, contact them and say, is this a job that could be done part-time? Could it be job shared? Could it be done part-time? And sometimes the answer is yes. And they just haven't bothered to put it on the advert. So I would say, find the job that you want and then have the conversation about, could I do this on a part-time basis? There are some employers that will say no, in which case, not to waste your time any further. But most jobs can be done job shared. I can't think of many jobs that can't. There are jobs, CEOs who work job share. So there are very few that can't, but there are organisations who aren't up for that. So I would say, ask the question, even if it's advertised as a full-time job, ask the question, could this be done part-time? And actually, it should be.
That's brilliant. And that's all we have time for today. Thanks again, Jane. We'll be emailing more details on Evenbreak to everybody who's registered today. So if you need any other information or have more questions, we can address them in that. Thank you all for joining us today. Thanks again, Jane.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.